Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Thanks for dropping by today. I think you are going to love this conversation with Kristin Vikjord. She is very knowledgeable and very bright, and appropriately, we're going to be talking about her book, Inner Spark. It's all about rekindling your own light and inner glow, and especially at times in your life when you might feel a bit lost or burned out. It's a great read, I think, for times of change, which I think many of us can relate to these days. And not only is Kristin a clinical psychologist, but she's a yogi and a mindfulness meditation teacher. And we met several years ago when we were in training together at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. So it was really, really fun to reconnect with her here on the podcast. We did have a little bit of microphone trouble, which I didn't realize until I started trying to edit the recording, of course. So the audio is not quite as even as usual. But I think it's plenty good enough, and I hope it won't deter you from really benefiting from all that Kristin has to share. If you've been listening to the recent episodes of this podcast, you know that I have been working really hard behind the scenes on a new project, the Mindful Movement Teacher Training. I am really excited to say that it's coming together, and it will be starting in October, and the details and application are up on my website now. Yay! It's going to be an interdisciplinary embodiment training for people who want to facilitate movement practices that really center mindfulness. If you have considered, or maybe you've taken a yoga teacher training, this program will be a little bit different. It's less about learning the fine details of poses or advancing your physical abilities or your students' abilities, and more about using movement as a vehicle for accessible meditative experience. So we'll be drawing from and studying yoga, Buddhism, somatics, qigong, and more, which is why I say it's an interdisciplinary training. I'll be presenting a core curriculum of the mindfulness and movement principles that I've honed over the years, and I'm lining up some fantastic guest speakers who can offer expert perspectives on these topics as well. If this sounds intriguing, go take a look at the schedule and the details at movedtomeditate.yoga/MMTT. MMTT stands for Mindful Movement Teacher Training. So it's just a page on my site, movedtomeditate.yoga/MMTT. Okay, with that, I hope you will enjoy this conversation with Kristin Vikjord and feel inspired to shine your own inner spark even more brightly. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm excited to be here today with Kristin Vikjord, who is a friend of mine that I'm reconnecting with from a training that we got to do together like several years ago in 2014-15, I think, at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, where we were both training in the mindful yoga and meditation program there. And Kristin is an amazing resource. She has published a book called Inner Spark, Finding Calm in a Stressful World. And she's also a clinical psychologist who teaches the application of yoga and mindfulness as complements to conventional therapy. She is the co-founder of Delight Yoga in Europe, the Arctic Yoga Conference, and the Inner Peace Conference in both Amsterdam and New York. And she lives in Bodø, Norway, with her husband and two sons, and she's going to tell us how to pronounce all of those things correctly. That I try, but it's a different word for me. So, welcome, Kristin, and it's so good to reconnect with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. I'm so happy to see you after all these years. It's pretty amazing.
It is, and you traveled from Norway to California for those retreats at Spirit Rock, which I thought at the time was pretty amazing. So, wow.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I remember one of the trips, I think I traveled for like 24 hours from doorstep to doorstep. You know, it was just really such a long journey. Yeah,
Wow.
I really wanted to attend the training.
It was an amazing training, and it was really international. There were people from different places, and you were probably one of the farthest away.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But that was part of what made it so amazing, I think, so rich to have people from all over the world participating.
Yeah, I really love the training. It was such a great composition of teachers. Also, you know, I love
Mm-hmm.
teachers and the whole group, and it was kind of special. You know, that we had 4 gatherings
Yeah,
spread out over a course of, I think, almost 2 years. You know, so
yeah.
it's a quite a long term. I really appreciated the whole setup and the training. Mm.
Same here, and I can't believe it's been that long.
I know.
Well, well, tell us a little more about you and who you are and what your work is about. I kind of gave the sketch with your bio, but I know there's a lot more to know about you.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I am from northern Norway, and I live in Bodø, and I was born here. And yeah, I've been traveling a lot throughout the years, and also with the yoga and the mindfulness, I got into that. You know, so I got to travel a lot and meet a lot of amazing people, which was just, you know, really fuels my enthusiasm, you know, for these teachings. And I got to meet a lot of cool teachers and just really great people that I started working with in different manners. And yeah, so in that sense, I just got to do really a lot of nice things, you know. And wherever I went, people were very open. Also in the hospitals, you know, open to bring these teachings into the treatment programs and part of the treatment programs.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
think that's amazing work that you're doing to bridge these sort of spiritual and self care practices with the clinical world and to bring them to patients who can use them.
Yeah, it's very special. And of course, it's not the same everywhere. I am quite aware, you know, that some places it's more conventional biomedical approaches and so forth. But I think and that's why I really wanted to take the training at Spirit Rock, because I know how they have their way of conveying the teachings. They really made a huge effort in this bridging the languaging and the worlds of biomedical approach and the mindfulness approach. So this is like,
Hmm.
it was for me very special to be able to partake in that training and to meet some of these amazing teachers that have built and created Spirit Rock.
That's a good point that many of the teachers at Spirit Rock are equally as well steeped in their Buddhist practice as they are in being a psychotherapist or having trained in psychology like Jack Kornfield, the founder of Spirit Rock. So there's a real culture there of dialogue between those different disciplines.
Absolutely. And I think it's pioneering, you know, in this paradigm, because if it hadn't been for that, you know, and for the work that they have been doing, I wouldn't have been able to do what I've been doing. So yeah, I really appreciate all the efforts, all the teachers, and all the practitioners before me. For
Absolutely. And when did you start your yoga and meditation practices? Like how did you discover these practices and begin to fold them into your psychology studies along the
mm,
way?
mm. Yeah, so I wonder. Let me see. Well, I think I was always very curious about meditation, you know, and that was something that came alive for me more when I was a youth. because I was reading a lot, and there wasn't anyone having a yoga studio or practice place here in Bodø. But then when I went to university, and I started psychology studies, one of my teachers there, she actually had a yoga studio. And so I went there, and that was pretty much the start of it, because the community there, they were all founded in the Buddhist traditions, so we did a lot of meditation, and yeah, it was a really good community for, merging these two approaches. Or it wasn't really emerging, it was just there, it was part of the discourse that we were doing. And so that's where it started. Yeah, that's already 25 years ago, I think. So.
Oh, that's really cool that it's sort of happening at the same time that you were studying psychology academically and then doing these practices. Um, Amazingly with some of your academic teachers, and so there was kind of like a pipeline of connection there already.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also interesting that you were saying the yoga you were doing was influenced by Buddhism, or happening in a context where both traditions were present, because yoga and Buddhism are distinct, but there's a lot of overlap and they're intertwined historically. And so there can be more or less of a Buddhist influence in yoga. So it's almost like you're really bridging yoga tradition, Buddhist tradition, and Western psychology. It's almost like three things that you're.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Yeah, and in a way it's like that, because, as the path kind of moved on for me, I found myself bringing yoga or the mindfulness into the clinical settings. And what we discovered soon then with my supervisors, my clinical supervisors, that also had some knowledge of mindfulness, is that we found that just the pure seated meditations, they could be too confronting and too challenging for certain patient groups, depending on where their how we say this, symptom pressure. If it's very high, then it's more challenging to, and it's actually contraindicative to do the seated meditations. So what we found was that doing the gentle, softer, moving meditation movements, yoga movements, that was much more beneficial and useful for these particular patient groups. And so that was, how it started for me. I was doing this, but then I was searching, like, but who are other teachers in this world can I find that's doing this mindful yoga? Like, I really felt like I'm such a junior. I really need to find more support. And I know I've read somewhere a little bit about mindfulness yoga, and well, it must be more people out there. So that kind of brought me to spiritual, and that's how I found the training.
That makes so much sense to me. What you're saying about that, not everyone finds the seated meditation accessible right away, depending on where they're at in their life and their process. And yet they can learn the mindfulness skills. The mindfulness skills could still be really useful, but we have to find other entry points for them, and the movement practices could be the doorway. And so that's really cool that you hit on that so early in your work. And I think mindfulness has been a huge influence on certain forms of psychotherapy, but this movement piece maybe hasn't quite come forward as clearly yet. Would you? Does that make sense? Do you agree with that, or is that?
Well, absolutely. But I think what is interesting is that, at this time when I was kind of finding this space also for the mindfulness, or the moving meditations, the mindful yoga, then there was also opening up for other more body-based psychotherapy. So it was really
True.
as if, as if the whole paradigm kind of expanded, and then we had, of course, the amazing work of David Emerson together with Bessel van der Kolk coming, along with their trauma sensitive yoga. so that really also opened the doorway even more to do more movement-based mindfulness practice. Actually, it's really nice that we had. I can't remember. So the Arctic Yoga Conference was something I started here up north, like maybe 2011, and basically it was because we had moved back from Amsterdam, and I thought I really want to learn more from more teachers, but I'm so far away from everything. So I thought, well, maybe I could just invite everyone here. And
Smart.
it was a little bit of work with the whole conference, but that was okay, and everyone wanted to come. So that was so amazing. So actually we had here, I think it was the first year, we had Mike Singleton. He wrote this book about the yoga body. It was a bit controversial, but
oh yes, that goes into history and asana and all this. Okay, yeah, it is a little controversial.
yeah, but I think he did a decent amount of work on this.
Mm-hmm.
We had him, and then we had David Emerson came, and James Fox, from Kristin Yoga.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, so we had a lot of people coming together, and this was the first time they met. They met here in Bodø, north of the Arctic Circle, So
Wild.
I thought, nice, yeah, it was
Magic.
very, yeah, for sure.
So you had some amazing guests and experts, and I'm not surprised they wanted to go to the Arctic Yoga Conference because it really does sound like magical and kind of otherworldly to me. It's a little bit exotic to me. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's quite exotic there, I'd say. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. And so, all this work you've been doing, all this study you've been doing, it's led to your book, which is called Inner Spark. I love the title. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why you chose that title and what that means to you, Inner Spark.
Yeah, so actually because I spend a lot of time, like, before I actually started to write the book from page one till the end, I did a lot of years where I was just trying to compile my own knowledge, like what have I learned, what is it that I want to share. And I did write a lot, and then in the beginning I actually started with like a working title, Radical Freedom. But then when I started off with the editors, they were like, well, that's a bit too philosophical, and it's quite kind of like, what is it? And then I thought, well, actually, there was a situation where I was many years ago together with my grandmother, and she was such she was an adorable lady, and she was kind of like, she was a northern Norwegian lady. She had been working hard her whole life. Maybe I was 18, 19 years old. And she told me, oh, Kristin, you look like a glass of champagne. You spark like a glass of champagne. And I was like, okay, thank you. I don't know what that means, but I took it as a compliment at that time. But, I was young and I was like, okay. But then after I had my children, I found myself very sleep deprived and exhausted at one moment, And suddenly that story or that moment with my grandma came to me where she had shared this with me. And I thought, oh my God, I don't really feel like a glass of champagne right now. I feel like, all this spark is just left. Where is it, That's really where it started when I started to find the frame, kind of the arc of my book, because then I thought, oh, there it is. This is like, what do we do, and how are we kind of, what are on our minds? Those moments when we find ourselves without that inner spark. What is happening then, and not only from a sensational point of view or physiological point of view, but also from the psychological point of view, and in our spirit. How does that look like? Where are we at that moment of time, and then how do we find back to the inner spark?
I love that story and just picturing that moment of you with your grandmother and that she's planting the seed, and at the time you filed it away in your brain in some way, but you didn't really know how significant that would be, and then it comes to you like it's a spark itself, of a thought. It comes to you in that moment, when you needed it, and kind of helped you navigate your own way out of that challenge of early motherhood and everything that came with it. So that's really beautiful how you shared your personal journey with that in the book. And what so if you had to define, the inner spark, what is that? Is that something that everyone has? Is it something that we can lose and reconnect with? Like, what is the inner spark?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And well, what do I know? I think, we all have it for sure. It's innate in everyone, and I think just like I had, it's the moment you don't have it anymore, you really notice, that there's something there that isn't there anymore. And if I go more like, into the psychology of it, it's really when we are in that state of ease, when our nervous system is well regulated and we have homeostasis within our system in our body, and we feel some kind of level balance, in our daily life. And for sure, when we have available to us this momentum to reach for, refill ourselves so we don't get depleted or, definitely not going to burn out. But it's, of course, logical and natural that we all vary in this throughout our lifespan. But this was the reason why I wanted to bring it all into a book, because I noticed that as I was kind of working myself through that phase, I thought, well, there are all these things that I'm working with my patients or my clients with, but also what I find through my practice and what I'm teaching in mindfulness and also in yoga. So I thought, how can I just kind of bring it all together? How can I make that book that I am looking for? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's really how it came together. And then also, for me, it was special because I had been writing quite a lot, especially kind of since my firstborn was born. So in 2011, I started to. I just found myself writing more and more. So in the end, when this book came to be an actual process in itself, I found that was also an expression for me that really helped me throughout this process.
Mm.
Yeah.
The creation of it itself was part of your journey back to your spark
Absolutely.
and your sparkle.
Yes.
And your effervescence like a champagne bubble. I love it. And it's really like it is a guidebook for investigating where you're at and finding your way to where you'd like to be. And you divided the book into these three sections that I thought were really interesting, of normalizing, clarifying, and agency. And so I wanted to ask you about those, and why, that framework existed for you, and if they're like aspects of the process or phases of the process, and how that works with normalizing, clarifying, and agency.
Yeah. Yeah. So the normalizing, I thought that was important because, the current paradigm, the society that we live in, there are certain aspects of this that kind of also, um, it impacts us in so many ways. And it also uh, is to show that when you are losing your inner spark, or if you get too exhausted, or there are, of course, a lot of burnouts and depression, uh, it was a way to open up, to show the reader that it's not only you. It's a much more complex uh, uh, situation you find yourself in. It's not just you, because that's often what happens when we start to struggle, we withdraw, and then we are completely like, ruminating with our thoughts and get very self-critical. So that was a way I wanted to open up to say, well, first of all, it's not you. It's not something wrong with you. This is, in a way, it's a normal reaction to maybe an abnormal situation, or if you're currently in something, like new motherhood or new job or pandemic, it can be so many things, but it's important to look at the whole framework and all the aspects around your situation.
I think that's really helpful because it offers some perspective, and we can get really lost in what's going on with us and take it so personally, and also feel like, what did I do wrong that I'm feeling like this? Is this my fault? And get really isolated. So kind of expanding the view out to the greater, wider humanity that experiences this, and that it's part of life. I think that loosens the grip quite a bit.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, so that's the part of the normalizing, to see, what is currently, and maybe, also inviting the reader to investigate a little bit for yourself what is currently around you, and what may impact you also in the state that you are currently in. And then the clarifying, that's a little bit more practical and inviting to more kind of inquiry for yourself. Like, where am I at actually? If I start looking at myself, so I also added there like more what I call this psychoeducation around, for example, the well-being modes, the different modes that we can be in, about the nervous system, of course, and very, I say, elemental things that I think each and everyone should know. And I think more and more people do know this now, but I thought, to be able to navigate through the book, it's good to have those hooks to kind of hang things on. And I know from my work and for myself also, when I learn something new about how things kind of are wired together, or how it works, then it also helps take the pressure off of me as an individual. Like, okay, that's also helpful to understand that this is a normal reaction to such a situation, and then the nervous system goes like this, and this part of the brain has a tendency to kind of close more off, that when there is more suffering happening and so forth.
I love that. It's like you start with zooming out a little bit with the normalizing and look at the big picture. Like, this is life, this is normal, this is part of what comes up. And then you zoom back in to the individual. Okay, here's your particular experience of this, and here's how it works in your brain, here's how it works in the nervous system. And so it's sort of like a shift of the lens a little bit that I think is helpful, preparing us to do the work, to make whatever changes we might need to make, or just to make it through a difficult time.
Yeah. And then the last part, the agency part. So that's all about how do we convert that then, into living,
What do we do with that info?
Yes. I mean, that's the question that I most often get, like, but how do I make the shift, or what can I do for myself? And I think also that's, when we are in a process, and when we are in the very beginning, where we feel very much exhausted and don't have access to our own resources, this is also kind of to just show a little bit, this is the direction you might want to go in, and what you will discover, I think most people discover, and is that then when you move on to this into this process, you start to have a few things available for you, and then you start doing those little things. Maybe that is to take more rest, like I call it a potent process. When you take a nap, you start integrating a nap into your day if you're very tired, or you start make a shift in the way you eat. Or if you have been isolating socially, maybe you start to reach out to friends or family or whatever, but maybe just once a week, and then next time a little bit more. So it's a way how you can kind of build it up for yourself, to get access to your own resources again, basically.
That stage of agency is very important because um, we do have to participate and engage in order for anything to shift. And all of the psychoeducation and perspective is really important, but we could also take it as like a fatalistic sentence, like, oh, well, it's just going to be like that if we stop there. So we don't want to get stuck. We need to then take that information and move with it and try something different. So I think that piece is really important.
Yeah,
You offer lots of cool exercises and different reflections and journal prompts and things in your book as well. So I think you set people up to really to try to make this their own and do something with it.
yeah, that was my hope, to have, give practices of different modalities. Also, some are movements, some are meditations, and some are writing, and and it's just, yeah, definitely, like you said, just for people to investigate and explore for themselves, like, how does this work for me, and what can I do at this time? And then you will see how, and this is something I really believe in, is that as long as you have a little bit of movement, like you said, if you are feeling in this place of stuckness, just if you just are able to keep a little bit of movement within yourself, then you will see that you are moving onwards. So
A little shift could become bigger over time. It takes time, and we don't have to do it all at once and get overwhelmed.
yeah,
It's better to start, like as you said, gradually with one small thing and then see what happens and then build on it.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
Yeah. And I know you wrote the book before the pandemic hit, and you had, like anyone else, no idea what was coming for us all. How have you found the themes of this book relate to this time, like when your book is coming out and it's just uncertain and it's wild and people don't know what to do with all the challenges they're faced with?
Yeah. Well,
How's that been?
yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was a big ride. Actually, throughout the pandemic, I had a huge life crisis happening for me, because actually my husband and I were split up, and that was,
Oh,
yeah. So that was also, both the pandemic came, and then, yeah, we also found ourselves going separate ways. So for me personally, when the pandemic hit, I thought, okay, I hope the book can be of use and of benefit to as many as possible. But then, when this particular crisis in my own life happened, then I really found myself like, okay, this is this is it, And I did find that I naturally kind of held on to these well-being prescriptions that are, in the end of the book,
hmm.
because, like I said, those are basically, uh, what I've gathered from both, my supervisors and teachers in clinical psychology, and what I do through my work there, but also from my teachers, in the wisdom teachings. So I really saw that this is something that feels natural to be working on and engaging in, like you said. And even if, everything seems to fall apart, there's still something there to hold on to. And, what you said there, just like a little step every day, can really bring a huge shift.
Wow, you've really been tested recently with this, these skills that you have and these teachings that you have access to. Amazing. Yeah, it's like you said, this spark is like this life force, this
Absolutely.
this something, this inner glow that's something we have within us that can keep us going and orient us when things are really lost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for many people, it's, like I said, it's maybe easier to discover that it's lost than, that it's kind of vanishing. And when it's lost or when it's really low, then it's of course harder to bring yourself back. My hope with this book is that it can offer some hope, of course, but that it also can help people to see more where they're at when things happen in life. When life crisis or how they feel mentally. All these things. That is part of the human journey. In one way or the other, if it can offer some support, that was my wish.
It's like a map, and it's so helpful when you feel lost to be handed a map. Like, oh, I'm here. Okay, I'm not the first one to travel here, and there's a road, and I can get on it. So it feels like a map. And you mentioned hope just now, and I was actually going to ask you about hope, because there's a passage in your book about hope and the role that it plays in helping us to access agency and take action. And you differentiated between hope and expectations. So I would love if you could talk a bit about, how do you relate to hope and use it wisely and cultivate it?
Oh, I don't know.
It's a big question.
Very good questions. Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm not sure what I'm going to reply now. I'm actually sitting here watching out on this big nature just outside my window, and this is where I grew up. And I do find, I always love that about here where I'm from, and I was traveling the world, I was living in many different places, but I always found that coming back to this nature, which is here, is so huge mountains, wild ocean, everything is so huge. And so you're kind of tiny, but it also gives me some hope in a way, both for I almost want to say humankind, but for me, like, this is, I can see with my bare eyes that I'm part of this, and it has some kind of purpose and sense to it. So I don't know if that's the answer. Like, I lean my hope on nature in a way. I really trust that things are panning out in a way but I really need to. That's also something I know, that I really need to be present in whatever is happening, even though that can be hard. So yeah, I don't know if that was a good answer.
It's beautiful. I really relate to that because, like, during the pandemic, I actually talked about this on my last episode of the podcast, that I had a brick and mortar yoga studio in LA at the time, and it was closed down because of the pandemic, of course. And then we decided to close it permanently. And all of that, during that time, I got access to a community garden plot that I'd been on the waiting list for years to get to do. And I like gardening, and I wanted to do it. So it was really exciting that this came up when it did. And those early days of the pandemic, when everyone was like learning to bake bread or growing their own vegetables, and I was like, I got to do that. But just watching things grow, like planting things, watering them, watching them grow, gave me hope in this really tangible way of, like, yeah, something still works the way it's supposed to. Like, this is still true, that if you plant a seed and water it, something will come out of the ground, usually. But not all of my plants did, but I sure grew a lot of zucchini. So it's just, you don't know what exactly will come out of it, but if you plant the seeds, like, this is the law of nature, something will happen.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, and I really, it feels like something to, like you say, you can trust, and you can lean on it and find some relief in a way in this, what is chaotic around you. Is that is true. Things will keep growing and evolving.
And in this little, spark of hope is really important. Otherwise, you will not have motivation to do anything. You'll just stay stuck. So that's why it's really connected to that last chapter on agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the differentiation with expectations, I think it's important. It's not maybe so clear for everyone, and depending on where you are in your process, but sometimes expectations can create a huge blockage for us, because we create very high standards, like I want to go from here to there, and I if that's not happening tomorrow, then I can just it could just be whatever, I'm just like,
Just give up.
yeah. So
Yeah. So there's a difference. There's, expectations where we think we know what the outcome is supposed to be and when, what timeline. And hope is something else. Hope is, what would you say? It's a little more open, or
yeah,
I don't know. How would you describe?
no, yeah, it's really more open. And I think it's also much more, in a way, more intimate. And it might also
Hmm.
be, wordless in a sense. It's more of a
Mm.
sensation. And like I said, for me personally, it's this kind of presence, a sensation of being fully present. And it's probably very individual for each and every one, but a sense of hope that things are, I am, or life is constantly moving onwards. So to trust that you are part of this movement, and not give up, for sure. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. The hope is connecting you to the flow of life rather than pulling you away from it. Or maybe if it's an expectation, it's more of like a fantasy of how you want things to be in a story of life. And like the true hope you're describing is more connected to just the present moment and what is and what's true. Yeah, I love what you're getting at there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I said, I think it's really, individual, and something for each and every one also to explore for themselves. But for me, this sensation of, yeah, what you said, the word of connection and feeling, I want to use the concept of interbeingness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is like when we can see that we are part of something bigger, basically. Mm. That can help us. And, back to these well-being prescriptions, and I talk about togetherness as the third one of the well-being prescriptions. And I think that's, especially during the pandemic, this was extremely relevant, of course, because then we noticed we got totally cut off socially suddenly, like very abruptly and quite severely. Um, but this is the aspect of being social and being connected, being together. That's one of the it's even one aspect that projects longevity even more than anything else,
Hmm.
that we know. And so I think that this aspect of hope, if it can give us a sense of connection to whatever is around us, if it's other people, if it's nature, if it's believing that the universe will take us somewhere, or but however you want to phrase it, but I really believe that's it's essential for us, to access that motivation we need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you mentioned nature as a huge resource for you and for your well-being, and I really enjoyed in your book some of the descriptions of the nature that's local to you and growing up in Norway and being above the Arctic Circle and seeing the aurora borealis and all of these things. So I wonder, if there's research about or just your personal experience to support the benefits of having nature be included in our practice of
Yeah,
well-being.
yeah. There's a lot more research being done, and we do know some stuff already. And for sure, any kind of the closer proximity we have to nature or anything other living organism being alive, if you live in a big city and it's your plant, or if it's your pet. Um, but this is something that we, and I think, for a lot of doctors also prescribing more and more this kind of green prescriptions, go out in nature.
Green prescriptions. I like it.
Yeah, yeah, go out and have some fresh air. That's how I grew up. Our parents always just said, "Go outside, children. Go and play outside."
Me too.
Even if it's a storm, we're like, "Okay, we have to go outside." But it was, it's something important in that. And now, of course, you see how climate is shifting so fastly. It's frightening, but then also we see how vulnerable it all is, and that how can we best preserve and take care of this nature that is our home. But being in nature, looking towards nature, interacting with nature, it does as well. We are also nature.
Not separate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point that, if we remember that we're not separate from nature, it makes sense why it's such a huge resource for us,
Yeah.
like on these deeper levels
Yeah.
of well being. I call it going out to get my vitamin tree.
Yeah.
It's definitely true for me. Just being out in nature can have a huge shift in how I'm feeling and the kinds of thoughts I'm having, and just combining that with movement. Like, I like to go hiking, so I'm kind of getting the benefit of both a movement practice and of the therapy of nature at the same
Yeah.
time.
Well, are you able to describe, maybe can you share an example, like how, if you feel in a certain way, if you feel down or, not so energized, and then you go out in nature, what happens then?
Yeah, I think if I have like a lot of if I'm having kind of like an anxious mood and I have a lot of restless thoughts and my head is just really, I'm up in my head really full of the thoughts, then if I get out in nature and I can just like feel my feet on the path and I can feel my muscles working and I can feel my breath changing and I can hear the sounds of the birds or the water, it just gives me a lot of different input to pay attention to other than my thoughts. And just a reminder of how much bigger things are, and you can look at a tree and realize that it's lived more lifetimes than you, and it's still there. So it just gives you so many opportunities to sort of create space around the experience that you're having. So you may still have the situation or the thoughts, but even just having a little more space around them can make a huge difference in not being stuck and not thinking that it's the only, that all the thoughts are true and that's exactly what it is and it's the only path. And
It creates,
does that make
yeah,
sense?
absolutely. It makes total sense. So it's like it creates a bit of a perspective also, and a pause. And when you were talking, it made me think of, what you were doing, this movement, like here, in the center of your body, like it makes me feel like this, something good. And I thought, this is so interesting, right? The vagus nerve, we know how the vagus nerve is here in the center. It's like an upside down tree.
Oh, cool. That's right. I wasn't even aware I was doing that
No,
movement. I was doing a Vegas.
yeah. So, and the vagus nerve, yeah, like an upside down tree, and what I usually think and how it experience sometimes, and is this how that tree inside of us, if you're anxious or if you are very activated, it starts to shake in a way. It's having a fall or something. I don't know what's happening. It's shaking.
Like a quiver of the tree. The wind is
Yeah.
blowing.
So when we go out in nature to the other trees, then our tree can be more closer to these trees, symbolically, but in a way, it makes sense, that we get directly affected with this nature, and it does directly affect our nervous system. So it helps
Well,
the nerve to engage in a way that helps us to release and lean more into this state of ease.
I love that. I love that imagery of the upside down tree, and you made me think about the term co-regulation, because you're talking about the importance of connecting with other people, and part of that, why we benefit from that, is that our nervous systems help each other stabilize, and we respond to other people's nervous system states, and we regulate or dysregulate each other through our presence. And that's why when you're with a calming person, it's very helpful. But the trees, we could be co-regulating with the trees too. I don't know how much they're getting from us, but we're getting something good from them.
I'm sure they get some good stuff from us also, especially from the tree huggers, you know, people that go and hug the trees.
Yeah, I like that. And you know what? I'm coming back to in my mind your structure of the book from the normalizing, the clarifying, and the agency, and now it's almost like we probably go through circles and through cycles with it. Like if I have the agency to say, "Hey, I need a break. I'm going for a walk," and I go out and I start to gain a new perspective and realize like, oh, this is bigger than just these thoughts, and the trees have lived more lifetimes than these thoughts, and all of that. I'm sort of coming back around to the normalizing and to kind of going, oh, like this is just life, this isn't personal. And so I can kind of go through that whole cycle in a deeper way, in a different way.
Yeah, and the many times we go through these different phases of kind of more diminished inner spark, and then we have higher inner spark. But it goes like that in cycles again and again in our life, and the hope is just that we get to have some kind of learning from what happened the last time, and so that we can access, we have more agency to support ourselves the next time around.
We can be more resilient instead of feeling just more beaten up by everything that happens. If we can learn from it, we realize we get stronger.
We can access our powers. That's what I usually say. We can access our superpowers. We find our superpowers. We get empowered. Basically, that's what it is. Yeah, we can really use our resources.
I really love that, and I think that your book is just so rich with you've inspired me thinking about these different aspects of kindling and caring for our spark. And I'm wondering if there's anything else that you want to add or share that we haven't covered yet.
Oh, I think what I want to share is just that, be gentle and slow in any movements that you do, and life as a way of, we are moving onwards, even if we want it or not, in one way or the other. But being gentle, patient with ourselves, that's really something that I hope that everyone can practice for themselves.
I think that's excellent advice. Where can people find more about you and all the different teachings and resources that you offer, Kristin?
Well, I have a website, like one needs in these times. The website is my name, kristinvikjord.com, and you can find more of my book there. My book is actually out in 4 languages, so it's also out in Spanish and Norwegian and Dutch.
Amazing.
Yeah. So you can find it in any language that goes best for you. And I also have my website an online platform, so you can sign up and have practices that go with the book, and just find what tools are useful for you in this moment.
Super helpful, and I'll link to your website on my website in the show notes so people can find it. And I was going to ask you what language you wrote the book in, because you speak several languages, and I'm very impressed by that. So I'm curious if you wrote it in your first language, or how did that go?
Yeah, it's quite a story, actually. It's fascinating, I have to say. I don't know how. Well, I actually wrote it in English.
You did?
Yeah. I don't know how that happened, but apparently I did. No, a lot of the teachings that I've been receiving has been in English, and everything in my studies, so everything was in English. So it felt more natural. I started off in Norwegian, but it didn't flow the way I felt was right. So I wrote the manuscript in English. It was translated to Dutch and published in Dutch first. So that's a little bit unique. And the Norwegian version of the book is actually translated by someone else. So they translated it from English to Norwegian. So yeah, it's
Oh, how interesting. Wow, I'm impressed that you wrote it in the first edition was English that you wrote. But that does make sense that since your studies a lot occurred in English, that this was the language of the techniques and in the way that you learned them. So it makes sense. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. And for you, it's getting late, so I know it's getting late in the evening there, so I better let you go to bed. But I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your spark, Kristin.
Thank you so much, Addie. I really appreciated being invited and to just talk with you. It's just such a beautiful experience to talk with you again. Yeah.
So, yeah, such a joy.
Yeah, such a joy.
Thank you. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.